In November of 2014, two young women disappeared off the streets of Hong Kong. With a city so large, almost nobody took notice, but both had succumbed to the hands of a violent psychopath. And, in fact, this case highlights one of the most horrific stories to come before the courts of Hong Kong. What exactly happened to Sumarti Ningsih and Lorena? What did they see in Rurik Jutting? And what horrors awaited them behind the door of room 3109? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're looking at the case of Rurik Jutting. Now, honestly, this story is not for the squeamish, and is a culmination of several of Hong Kong's many flawed systems, so with that said, viewer discretion is advised. And of course, just to let you know that I post true crime and strange cases here weekly, so if that's your sort of thing, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime for more videos. Now with that said, please pull up a seat and grab yourself a coffee. This is the case of Rurik Jutting. This is likely a story you've never heard of, but today's video takes us to a city that likes to call itself the Pearl of the Orient. So without further ado, welcome to Hong Kong, folks. Now, Hong Kong has a very long and complex history, but focusing on its modern-day structure helps us contextualize its many unique and bizarre dynamics, something which you will soon find out is crucial to today's case. So, where do we begin? Say the name Hong Kong and most of us think of its many skyscrapers and buildings, which makes sense as it's one of the most densely populated cities on the planet. Situated on an island and by the side of a mountain, space is an absolute luxury in this city. And with 7.5 million residents within a mere 430 cubic miles, almost 18,000 people live per square mile. Before running away with ourselves here, there are actually many benefits to living in Hong Kong. It is ranked 4th on the Human Development Index, has an insanely vibrant culture, and excellent healthcare. And in fact, life expectancy in Hong Kong is 88.2 years for women, which is actually the highest figure globally. But with population density in mind, a bunch of other issues come to light. For example, there is a massive problem when regarding the city's wealth divide. Hong Kong has been ranked the least affordable market in the world for 12 years in a row, and things are only getting worse. As a direct consequence, hundreds of thousands of its residents are being forced to live in tiny apartments and homes. And if you know much about Hong Kong, you already know where I'm going with this, and that's cage homes. Unfortunately, this is the life for thousands upon thousands of residents. Find your favourite shirt or two and pack all of your belongings into a small box, but nothing more, as simply put, you won't have any room for anything else in a cage home, which, by the way, is typically around 75 square feet, less than a car parking space. Now, there are other reasons why housing is so expensive here, such as extortionate land auction prices, which compensate for the city's low tax rates. But to keep it short and not so sweet, Hong Kong is a very expensive place to live. One of the main demographics to get this problem in the neck is migrants from surrounding countries. Many of them come into Hong Kong for its inflation rate, as a higher cost of living usually provides a higher salary. And this means that any money left over at the end of the month stretches much further when back home. Slicing this demographic one step further, but one of the main groups of migrants is Indonesian women. And more than 150,000 Indonesians live and work in Hong Kong as maids, nannies, and other domestic workers, all of which who provide their services to Hong Kong's middle and upper classes. Now, life as a domestic helper in Hong Kong isn't easy. Employers' expectations are very high and give no mercy to workers trying to adjust to the big city. The days are long and the job is both arduous and demanding. Domestic workers rise early, care for the family's children, cook meals, clean the house, and then leave. And some will even go home and do this all over again for their own family. All of this hard work would only provide around $500 per month, which isn't much when living in Hong Kong. But for migrants coming from poor areas, that stretches a very long way. Now, of course, this is all very different to Hong Kong's elite, and one of Hong Kong's wealthiest individuals was 29-year-old British banker Rurik Jutting. In the year 2014, Rurik was approaching his 30s. He worked as vice president and head of structured equity finance for Bank of America Merrill Lynch in Hong Kong. And needless to say, that meant he was making very serious money, about $400,000 per year to be exact. Rurik's history comes from a place of fortune and comfort. His mother and father lived in South London when they married in 1984, before conceiving Rurik in March 1985. His father was an engineer who worked at a local firm and was interested in vintage motorcycles. And in parallel to this, his mother ran an American-style milkshake bar in the local town of Woking. Both of them were intelligent people and did very well to create a small fortune for the family. The Juttings lived in a prestigious Grade 2 listed mansion named Foxwarren Cottage, which actually was the inspiration for Toad Hall in the classic book The Wind in the Willows. And although the family were well off, their money was not unlimited. It is believed that both parents made a myriad of financial sacrifices to pay for Rurik and his brother to be privately educated. Rurik attended Wallop School in Weybridge, where teachers described him as a bit of a strange chap who wasn't very popular. After finishing school, he was put through Winchester College, which cost the family around £34,000 per year. And for you Americans out there, that's around $40,000. Rurik then went on to gain a place at Cambridge University, where he studied law and history at the university's Peterhouse constituent. His parents' financial sacrifices were technically worth it, as after graduating from Cambridge, Rurik embarked on a prestigious career in banking. He began his career at Barclays Bank, before moving on to work at Bank of America's Merrill Lynch in London. Keeping within the business, he later moved on to Hong Kong to work as an equity trader, a job that landed him a hefty sum of £350,000 or $400,000 per year. And to complement this massive pay packet, he rented apartment 3109, a luxurious apartment on the 31st floor of one of Wan Chai's prestigious residential buildings. There was a downside to his work, however. With a pay salary that large, he would have to put in serious hours of work, make huge decisions for the business, and be under enormous stress. Now, I'm sure the money was great, but if you're always busy and unhappy, then you're never really going to enjoy the lifestyle it can provide. This was reflected in Rurik's day-to-day mood, as he often told his friends, colleagues, and fiancé that he was stressed and depressed. And unfortunately, he also contemplated taking his own life. And on the mention of fiancé, things hadn't gone so well for Rurik and his previous relationships either. Back in 2010, Rurik fell in love with a colleague at Barclays Bank, and her name was Sarah Butt. Sarah was a sensible yet fun woman to be around, and while the two found love in London, she eventually moved to New York on a 12-month secondment. During this time, she fell in love with another man, and once their affair started, Rurik went, quote, ballistic. As a direct result, she flew back to New York on the very same day just to get away from him. And although the couple attempted to rekindle their romance, even getting engaged for a short time afterwards, Jutting struggled to get over the affair and ended the relationship a short time after. After moving to Hong Kong, he surrounded himself with beautiful local women, showing off his new life to friends living back home in England, and doing this through a series of Facebook posts and online updates. It was around this time in July 2014 that Rurik met and fell in love with Ariane Guarin, also known as Yanni for short. From here on out, many of his posts included her wearing fancy necklaces and rings that he bought her, and from the outside it appeared the two were madly in love. But on the inside, there was a dark and gluttonous aspect growing within Rurik. He became increasingly obsessed with orgies, and often had sex with 2 or 3 women at a time during drug-fueled parties. To add to this, he also dropped all of his current hobbies and interests, and doubled down on his reckless spending habits. And by September 2014, he and Ariane were no longer a couple. Now, according to a former police official, his binge sessions turned him into an aggressive and zombie-like individual. And since there was no financial limit to his spending habits, he just kept on doing it. And the deeper he went, the worse he became. I mean, the man is probably the definition of work hard, play hard when taken to an extreme level. He would work 16-hour workdays, and then compensate for all of this with drugs, orgies, and alcohol. And throughout all of this, friends noted he was behaving more aggressive, taking more risks, and acting more aloof. The man seemed to be losing his mind. On Monday the 27th of October 2014, Rurik posted to Facebook to say, "Stepping down from the ledge, my new journey begins. Scared and anxious, but also excited. The first step is always the hardest." He then left his job, and in the process, the man changed his automatic email response to the following: "I am out of office indefinitely. For urgent inquiries, or indeed any inquiries, please contact someone who is not an insane psychopath. For escalation, please contact God. Though suspect the devil will have custody. Last line only really works if I'd followed through." Later that very same week, Hong Kong experienced 2 disappearances. Not that anyone took note, as sadly, more than 4,000 people vanish in the city every year. However, what made this unusual is that both of them were young women who vanished in the same area within 4 days of one another. Both of them had disappeared near Wan Chai, a residential district found within Hong Kong. And to make things even more concerning, they both came from a relatively similar background. The first to go missing was a young woman named Sumarti Ningsih. Adopting the nickname Alice, Sumarti grew up in a small village found deep in the countryside of central Java, Indonesia. In 2010, when Sumarti was just 19 years old, she left Indonesia to seek employment in the city. You see, the problem is, money is scarce when living in the middle of nowhere, and one thing Sumarti greatly wanted to do was provide for her family. She answered this call by taking up work in Hong Kong as a domestic helper. But this did come with its fair share of sacrifices. Sumarti would have to leave behind her baby, and the baby had no father as the man left shortly after his birth. No doubt, Sumarti was a very caring and generous young woman. She made it her mission to provide for the family financially, and so she did. Over the following months and years, she covered the costs needed to repair the family home. She also purchased a washing machine and then provided comforts such as DVD players and guitars. Returning in 2013, Sumarti admitted that she was now tired. She wanted to do something more than just be a domestic cleaner. And so on that note, she joined a DJ school to focus on her passion. The following year, she returned to Hong Kong with a tourist visa and new skills. She'd hoped to find work as a DJ and would work at cafes until she was settled. During this time, there was very little discussion with her family about where she was working, but she did promise to return to Indonesia at the start of November 2014. And this would make a lot of sense, as after all, her tourist visa would expire on the 2nd of November. Tourist visas don't allow you to work in the country, so what Sumarti was doing was technically illegal. Local friends of hers knew she was living in an illegal boarding house near Wan Chai, which was found south of Victoria Harbour. She could also be found most evenings at Makati Pub and Disco, so it was very likely that what she was doing was secretly working there for cash in hand. And in fact, out of all places it could be, this would be the last place friends remembered seeing her. Musky, dark and dingy, the Makati was well known to be a raunchy bar that mixed two very unequal demographics. That would be young migrant women and well-dressed male expats, and you can probably guess why. The women would dance, flirt and tease these men in exchange for money and drinks, and the bar would allow them to do such a thing in exchange for a small cut of the profits. It was ultimately up to these women if they wanted to keep their work within these four walls, but technically, nothing was stopping them from following these men home after working hours. Now, this is an extremely risky business, but on the other hand, the money involved was very lucrative. It brought in triple the amount that domestic housework does, so maybe this is what lured Sumarti. And then, only 6 days before her visa was set to expire, Sumarti suddenly disappeared. The next young woman to vanish was Jessie Lorena. Named Senang Mujiasi, she preferred her nickname Jessie while in Hong Kong. Jessie was quite similar when compared to Sumarti. She was born in 1984 to a family living in the Muna Regency of Southeast Sulawesi, which is one of Indonesia's many offshore islands. And, much like Sumarti's childhood, Jessie lived in a place where money wasn't flowing. Jessie moved to Hong Kong in April of 2006, and after obtaining a working visa, she also became a domestic worker between 2010 and 2012. After her work visa expired, she briefly returned home before travelling to Hong Kong under a tourist visa. Now, once again, tourist visas do not allow you to obtain legal work while in Hong Kong. And this is a problem, as without the required paperwork, nowhere legitimate will employ you. She therefore resorted to obtaining illegal work, which very likely meant sex work. And to make things extra risky, she unfortunately overstayed her tourist visa, which had expired almost 1 month prior. The length of Jessie's disappearance was much shorter when compared to Sumarti's. Sumarti had disappeared 4 days prior, but next it was Jessie. Unreleased surveillance footage shows Jessie at the new Makati Pub and Disco at 1:35 AM on November 1st, 2014. The camera recorded her chatting to a man who regularly frequented the bar, and this man was no one other than Rurik Jutting. At 2:15 AM, another security camera captured the two leaving the bar together, before making their way toward his apartment located only several minutes down the road. Several minutes later, both of them made it to his apartment 3109, and her last form of contact would come around 1 hour later. At 3:25 AM, Jessie messaged a friend to say that she had grown uncomfortable in his presence. The place smelled awful, and something appeared to be off. The text message said, "Something smells really bad, I want to get out of here." And tragically, these would be the final known words of Sanang Mujiasi. At 3:42 AM, a calm and collected call was made to the Wan Chai Police Department, and on the other end of the line was Rurik Jutting. He requested them to investigate his apartment immediately. He called them a further 2 times along the way, reporting that something bad had happened in his apartment and that they better hurry up. When they arrived, a 12-inch knife, sex toys, and a lot of cocaine was found. And sadly, that was only the beginning. Lying in the middle of the living room floor was a body. Jessie was naked, covered with cut wounds to her neck, throat, and buttocks. And although she was alive, she was in a terrible state and was losing a lot of blood. Tragically, by the time paramedics arrived, she was pronounced dead. Rurik was covered in her blood and was talking delirious nonsense as officers looked on in horror. Needless to say, the man was arrested on the spot, and so began a very long and gruesome review of the crime scene. It would actually take 8 hours for forensic investigators to make their way through the lounge and the bedroom and onto the balcony, and after opening the balcony door, a very rancid smell hung in the air. The smell had actually been reported by other residents over the last 2 to 3 days, and now officers knew exactly where it was coming from. They found a large black suitcase, and inside was the body of a second victim. Sadly, over the following hours, it was concluded that the body belonged to Sumarti Ningsih.
British investment banker Rurik Jutting has appeared in court in connection with the murder of 2 women in an upscale apartment in Wan Chai District, Hong Kong. The 29-year-old did not enter a plea as the charges were being framed. Jutting was arrested over the weekend after 2 women, believed to be of Indonesian origin, were found murdered in a residential complex. The victims, Lorena and Sumarti Ningsih, have also been identified. Both women are believed to be sex workers, and the neighbourhood is thought to be a red light district. It's also been reported that police found a small amount of cocaine and sex toys at the crime scene.
Now, as part of the official investigation, officers scoured the contents of Rurik's mobile phone, and what they uncovered was truly horrific. Officers found over 2,000 photos and dozens of videos taken during Rurik's actions, all of which had happened over the space of 3 days. He had taken over 1,000 photos, many of which were of a sexual nature, and to add to this, some even included the partially severed head of Sumarti. He also recorded himself as he rambled to the camera about various aspects of his life and his crimes. Rurik had recorded more than 4 hours of video footage of himself rambling in front of his victims' bodies. And although most of the footage has not been publicly released, a heavily condensed version of what we publicly know is as follows. My name is Rurik Jutting. About 5 minutes ago, I just killed and murdered this woman here. It's Monday night. I've held her captive since early Saturday. I feel a bit sad because she was a good person, but I don't really feel guilty. My hand is still shaking and I feel sick, but I don't feel guilty, but clearly I feel something. I can't describe what it means. I don't recognize myself. I've basically been lying on the sofa for the whole week. The things I get up for are coke, alcohol and food, and I've had a lot of Pizza Express lasagna. I'm waiting to be kicked out by the police. Some people may see this as the narcissistic ramblings of a murderer, which is true. Obviously, I am clearly loopy. Just to let you know, but I've stitched together all publicly available parts of this transcript, which is much longer than this and goes into some pretty heavy detail. Details I can't even share here on YouTube. But if you're interested in hearing the full undisclosed transcript, then I'll leave it as a separate article on my Patreon. Although Rurik confessed to killing both women, he pleaded not guilty to murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility. He did, however, plead guilty to the lesser crime of manslaughter. With Rurik's actions being so abnormally callous and vile, and a clear indication that he was excessively stressed in his former years, uncertainty over his mental health loomed over the court. 4 psychiatrists medically assessed him, and all of them came to the same conclusion. They concluded that Rurik Jutting was mentally fit to stand trial, and the only thing that he was diagnosed to have was narcissistic personality disorder. With that said, his trial commenced in October of 2016. During his trial, Rurik claimed that he and Sumarti had initially met at a hotel near his flat during a 6-day period when he had a multitude of sex workers visit him for cocaine and fun. The second time he met Sumarti was on October the 27th, where he offered to pay her 10,000 Hong Kong dollars if she spent the night with him. And unfortunately, this ultimately turned into 3 days of torture. During this time, Rurik used a belt, sex toys, a pair of pliers, and his fists to torture Sumarti over 3 long days. At 12:51 PM on October the 31st, and once he had killed Sumarti, a surveillance camera caught him leaving his apartment. A little over 1 hour later, he returned home with several bags full of hardware and tools. Inside one bag was a blowtorch, hammer, nails, pliers, and sandpaper he had bought from a DIY store. After returning home, he put his bags down and returned to the streets before making his way to Makati Pub and Disco, where he then began his hunt for a second victim. After setting his sights on Jessie, he lured her back to his place. As we know, the two started talking in the early hours of the morning, and by 2:15 AM, the two left for his place. And not even 1.5 hours after arriving, she was dead. Needless to say, but the evidence laid before Rurik Jutting was overwhelming in his trial. Prosecutors had surveillance footage, bodies in his apartment, receipts, suspicious emails, and last but definitely not least, more than 2,000 photos and over 4 hours of confession videos. During his trial, Judge Mr. Justice Michael Stuart Moore lashed out at Rurik, calling him an arrogant man who dredged the depths of depravity as he snorted cocaine and necked booze to fuel his underlying bloodlust. On November the 8th, 2016, Rurik Jutting was officially found guilty over the murder of Sumarti Ningsih and Sanang Mujiasi. The jury was, of course, unanimous in their decision. Rurik showed no emotion after the verdict was read, and instead sat silently in the dark at the back of the courtroom. This was in stark contrast to almost everyone else, who applauded and welcomed the verdict. As a result, Rurik Jutting was sentenced to 2 concurrent life sentences. Rurik had made previous claims that he was a psychopath, a narcissist, and a murderer. And although he was correct, he failed to highlight his privileged yet predatory behaviour. Rurik almost had it all. He had loving parents who sacrificed their money for his future, he was amongst the highest earners, and he could afford to do almost anything he wanted to do. This was the exact opposite of his victims, who could afford almost nothing, were amongst the lowest earners, and sacrificed all of their money for their families back at home. And with all this in mind, it's actually horrifying to realise that Rurik hunted those who suffered at the very parameters he took for granted. It really is a sad story when you think about it. Sumarti and Jessie were very hard-working women from poor villages in rural Indonesia. It doesn't matter what you say about their choices in secondary work, but both women worked very hard to help their families back home financially. At times, this even included risking their own safety. And despite their demanding jobs and duties, they would send everything they could back home with love. Sadly, they are not a minority, and recent figures estimate there are more than 34,000 domestic workers living in Hong Kong. This job can be very challenging, with studies estimating that the average domestic worker does more than 71 hours of work per week. To add to this frightening figure, around 1 in 6 of these are subjected to severe physical and mental abuse. In short, this case does very well to highlight the problem Hong Kong has with exposing vulnerable women to danger. And although officials are working hard to crack down on this systemic problem, and although Hong Kong boasts an extremely low homicide rate, women are still violated and abused here daily. Several days after her death, Sumarti's body was flown back to Jakarta and driven back to her village. Shortly after this, she was buried in her village cemetery. The early morning ceremony was attended by her friends, family, and dozens of neighbours. Jessie's body was also returned to her family in southeast Sulawesi. Her brother described her as the backbone of the family, who regularly sent money back home to provide for them. There aren't many side notes to this case, but in an interview with Rurik's most recent ex-girlfriend, she admitted that she still loved him and believed he was a good man.
Are you in love with him? I mean...
Yeah. I still have a feeling for him, yeah. For me, Rurik, he's very sweet, he's a good lover. And, we understand each other, we have lots of good times together, not only sex, we really enjoy our time together.
Quite funny to watch, but when asked what her sex life was like with him, she was very awkward to answer.
What was the experience like? The sex, was it good or was he?
The sex, Okay. It was good!
Yeah.
Well, will you look at the time, folks? Shop's closing for the night, so I'll have to wrap this one up. But thank you so much for being here with me for another case on Coffeehouse Crime. I really appreciate you being around. Now, as always, please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below, and I'll see you again very soon for another video. I'd like to say thank you to Adrees for suggesting this case, and honestly folks, you're all fantastic at case recommendations, so thank you. If you have any serious recommendations on a case, then please feel free to email me at case@coffeehousecrime.com. I do try to read all emails and reply where I can. Just a heads up, but sorry if I don't, because that inbox is getting swamped. Anyway folks, you know the score by now. I'll be back again very soon for another video. However, until that moment arrives, please remember to look after each other and stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye. So I've just come back from shopping, and I bought myself a new cat. I think he's broken though.
Help! Help! I'm being repressed! Put him up! Put him up! Oh, scared, huh?